Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I'm your Innkeeper Vase Odin, and today we'll be doing a deck building workshop for Arkham Horror, the card game. Last month I put out a video with some deck building tips. That is the method I use for building decks over time and refining and testing and refining the decks. What we're doing today is my method for building decks quickly. If you have a friend that wants to try out an investigator and you need to help them make a deck very quickly, this is what I would use. It's also really good as a starting point for your more refined decks later on. So let's get started. This methodology is divided into 6 parts, and the last part is divided into 3 subsections, and I'll explain each one as we go through them. Alright, so the first question I ask myself when making a quick deck is, what is this deck's thing? And usually that's based on the investigator that you're using. So, as an example, we'll be using Silas Marsh. He's pretty straightforward and simple. Pretty much a straight survivor, neutral cards, all levels 0 to 5, and innate skills 0 to 2. And you also want to look at the abilities of the investigator. So a 2 in both willpower and intellect, and a 4 in both fight and evade. And then his special ability and also his elder sign effects seem to both have a lot to do with skill tests. So generally that's a good indicator, but you want to be careful not to overdo it with the skills, because that's not going to win you a game. So definitely kind of look into that, see how you want to approach it. The way I approach that is I gather all the cards that are available to this investigator, and then I start sorting them down. And then once I have a sorted down pool of the ones I definitely don't want to use, then I start kind of going through those into these steps. So in Silas's case, he can use innate skills. So all the survivor cards I'm going to pull out, and then the 3 innate skills that you see here, Defiance, Fearless, and Inquiring Mind, are probably going to be the most useful to Silas. So I'll go ahead and pull those and include them in the pool for now. I also look at the investigator's class, because a lot of classes have signature cards that are almost always guaranteed to be great in any deck of that class. In the survivor's case, Dark Horse is very, very common amongst all investigators that share that class. Well, not all, but a lot of them like to build Dark Horse decks. So I definitely wanted to take a look at Dark Horse and see if it would be a viable build for this Silas deck. So the second step into the deck building, I look at the investigators and how they're going to handle investigating, because that is a huge part of most games. So you want to look at the card pool that's available and see what cards are going to aid you in investigating. In this case, look what I found: Perception, as well as a few other wild icon cards that kind of depend on clues, such as Inquiring Mind. So I went ahead and separated those into that category of investigation to help Silas during those times when he'll need it. Then in the third part, combat is another major part of playing the game. So there's 2 ways to handle combat. You can evade enemies or avoid it altogether, or you can fight. So I look at the cards that are available for both of those, and then I kind of compare them to the investigator's stats. In this case, Silas has a 4 in both fight and evade, so you can build him one way or the other. So you can build him to be evasive, which, as you can see, there's a lot of cards in the survivor card pool that are great for evading, or you can build him to fight, and there are a few cards in the survivor card pool that will help you do that as well. So I recommend you don't do both, or you don't get a whole bunch of cards for both, because it'll make your deck extremely inconsistent. You do one or the other, fight or evade, and you'll have the other as a backup. You know, if you're mostly an evader, you definitely want to be able to handle yourself in case you're fighting a boss, or if your partner investigators die, that kind of stuff. And you also want to be able to evade a little bit, just in case you face something that you really can't handle, so you'll be able to get away. Now, the next question that I ask myself when building the deck is, how will I handle the agenda? And what I mean by that is, specifically, the agenda tends to move very quickly. Doom gets added every round, and sometimes faster than that, and you need to have action economy. And without action economy, you're not going to win. That is probably the third most important thing, other than fighting and evading, is action economy. So you definitely need to have cards that'll help you with that. And I have a video about action economy, which you can check out right here on the link above. So what I mean by action economy is dealing extra damage per hit, picking up extra clues when you attempt to pick up clues, or moving for free or getting extra actions during the turn. And the survivor class doesn't really have too many options in terms of action economy, so you kind of have to take what you can get. The next step is surviving treacheries, because those can take you out of a game unexpectedly. Now, usually the way treacheries work, if you have a low evade score or agility score, generally treacheries that require a high agility check are going to do damage to you. And usually treacheries that require a high willpower will do horror to you. So if your investigator has low horror or just low willpower, definitely want to look at ways to mitigate that. So in this case, you can either do that by healing horror, because Silas does have a low willpower and low horror. So that means you definitely have to prepare for treacheries that will give you some horror. So Peter Silvestri is a great one because he can keep healing horror and you can assign it to him. And also you can have cards that will just absorb horror damage, like the Cherished Keepsake. That's another good way to go about it. If you're building for an investigator with low agility or low health or both, you want to be able to have some cards that will help you with the agility checks or help you absorb damage to avoid those, or to help mitigate those treacheries that come up that will do that to you. And of course, you definitely have to give Big Burly Silas his teddy bear. So then, the sixth step, you want to cut down your deck, and I split that into 3 parts. The first part, you want to group cards by function and then filter them down that way. So what I do, I go, okay, finding clues, look what I found, and perception both can help you find clues in different ways, as well as flashlights and so on. I think that 4 to 6 cards are good enough if investigation is not your primary thing. Same goes for combat cards. You know, if combat is not your main thing, then 4 to 6 cards are probably going to be good enough. Now, usually decks will have a spot for less specific cards, more general cards like Unexpected Courage. They're very useful, but those are some cards you can cut if you need to, in order to really refine your decks. So basically what you're doing here is cutting down if you have too many of one type. So if you have too many healing cards, and it's between True Grit and Emergency Aid, then just base it on whether you need to also help other investigators absorb damage, or if you need to pay less resources. Then the second step in narrowing down your deck is keeping in mind the cost of your deck. In this case, we're probably going to go with the Dark Horse build, so you want to have 0 resources. In that case, you don't want to have expensive cards. Like, you know, we were still deciding whether we wanted to evade or fight, so this might help us to make that final decision. Waylay costs 3, Cunning Distraction is an amazing card, but it costs 5. Doesn't really synergize well with Dark Horse or Dark Horse build. And since in Silas you're using a lot of skill cards that cost nothing, and your fighting cards cost really low, like Improvised Weapon costs 1, Fire Axe costs 1, you know, that might be a better option, because you only need 1 resource to play these, or Baseball Bat you'll need 2, so very low compared to the evade cards. Okay, so this kind of helps, because now I can narrow it down, not just because of the cost of the cards, but also it helped me decide whether I want it to be a fighting type or an evading type. And also you want to be able to have some kind of card draw. Usually, not every deck requires it, but a deck like Silas that's very fast, you pitch a lot of cards to skill test because he uses a lot of skills. You want to be able to replace those. So Rabbit's Foot is a good one, as well as the neutral skill cards that kind of replace themselves, such as Perception or Overpower. And then last but not least, you want to think about your upgrade strategy. You don't want to just think about what cards you want to upgrade to once it's time to upgrade, because you can ruin your deck or upgrade to the wrong types of cards. So have a plan of where you want to go. He's going to be a fighting type, we've already decided, so Flare is a good one to go with. It'll help his fighting. Peter Silvestri can just replace the old Peter Silvestri. The Rabbit's Foot level 3 can replace the old Rabbit's Foot. So those are cards that you're still going to be able to keep. And if you have a card that you don't particularly care for, but you just threw it in there because you felt you kind of had to, or you had no other choices for what its purpose was, well, when you upgrade, think of what card can replace it that can do its job a little bit better or in a different way that might benefit your deck more. So those are the kind of things you want to think about. I won't post a deck list on this deck that we kind of just worked with. It's just a basic thing to make a deck quickly and to help you kind of narrow down and then use the other strategies of building decks to kind of refine that until you get a deck that really works for you. Hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully you like this video, or share or subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you all real soon. I'm your daddy.